In this video, Chicago style deep dish pizza. And this is different than really any other pizza out there in the sense that the crust is more like a biscuit dough than it is actually a piece of pizza. And it's so deep it eats like a casserole instead of a pie. So here I have bread flour and cornmeal. Cornmeal gives a nice textural element to the Chicago style pizza crust. Yeast, salt, sugar, going to dry blend that together. And then traditionally, you'll find corn oil in a Chicago style pizza crust, but I like to use 20% melted butter and 10% light olive oil. And that's just because I've tested a lot of different oils, a lot of different fats, and that's what I prefer. So sue me, okay? So now what I'm going to do is see how I'm blending the flour with the fat before I add the water. What that's going to do is that's going to actually coat the gluten strands in the fat, retarding the gluten formation before I add the water. So if I add the water first, then we're going to have more gluten formation. Because we want this to eat more like a biscuit dough, we mix the fat in first, stir around in our flour, and then we add in the water later. That's going to be important for our biscuit-like texture. So now we're going to do an autolyse where we just let all the ingredients sit together for about 20 minutes just to allow the dough to hydrate a little bit. And normally you wouldn't have sugar or salt in your autolyse, but in this case, because we're not trying to develop gluten, then it doesn't really matter. So you can add all the ingredients up front. So now I'm mixing the dough on the number 2 setting of a KitchenAid with the dough hook attachment. And I just want to get it to form some sort of semblance of a dough. Now, remember, because we're doing more of a flaky, biscuit, crumbly style dough here, we don't need it to pass the window pane test. We don't need to have a whole lot of gluten structure. We just want to have enough gluten structure to make the dough somewhat sturdy so it holds up during the cooking process and to make it workable. So after the dough has formed, it's going to take about maybe 4 to 5 minutes of kneading in your KitchenAid. I'm just going to round the dough off as shown here and then place it in a container that we hit with a little bit of a non-stick spray, just as our insurance policy. Cover with plastic wrap so it doesn't dry out, and allow this to proof for about 2 hours at room temperature. Now, at this point, you can also slow down the fermentation by placing it in your refrigerator overnight. Now, in the meantime, I'm going to make the sauce, which is very, very simple. Now, in Chicago, they use what's called 9-in-1, and 9-in-1 is a brand of diced tomatoes, and that's part of the authentic flavor of a Chicago-style pizza. So you want to drain off, and you can use any diced tomato that you want. So just drain off the canned diced tomato so it's not super watery. And then you're going to season with salt and pepper and stir that in, check for seasoning. Now, my little secret, which isn't traditional, is I like to add a little dash of fish sauce. But fish sauce and tomatoes together have this really beautiful synergy where they become extremely flavorful and you get a really nice umami. So whenever I work with tomato while I'm making a spaghetti sauce, pizza sauce, whatever it is, a lot of times I'm going to add fish sauce. And you add just enough to enhance the flavor of the tomatoes, not to actually make it perceptibly fishy. Now here I have a 10-inch cast iron pan. You see I poured in some olive oil and then I'm wiping it out. So I don't want a bunch of excess oil in there because it'll make it greasy. So I'm just wiping it out. Now I'm just going to take this dough here and press it out into a disc. And you can see the dough is fairly easy to work. And you don't want to use a rolling pin. You want to just press it out with your fingers. And I like to line the cast iron pan with a little bit of cornmeal. And that's going to help prevent the crust from sticking. But also it adds a nice texture to the bottom. I like how the cornmeal, as it bakes, it hardens on the bottom of the crust, and it gives you a really nice crunchy texture. So just sprinkle that around before you place your dough into the cast iron. Now, once you've pressed the dough into say 10-inch disc, you're going to just drop that directly into the cast iron pan and finish your forming. Now, you'll notice too, I haven't used a rolling pin at all, right? Because again, that would press the layers of the dough together and make it more dense. We're not going for a dense dough here. In fact, you never want to use a rolling pin for any of your pizza doughs ever. So here I'm just taking the dough, a lot like if I was making a tart, and I'm just pressing the dough on the inside of the edge of the cast iron pan and just kind of bringing it up the sides. Now you want to lay in a thick layer of sliced mozzarella cheese, and you want to use low fat preferably and low moisture so it doesn't sog out your crust. And you lay down the cheese first because that keeps all the other moister ingredients from sogging your crust on the Chicago style pizza. Now here I have Italian sausage that I made in-house, and I'm going to press that down into my pie crust. And at this point, so basically a Chicago style pizza, the traditional method or flavors is just the cheese. You can add a mixture of cheeses, the Italian style sausage, and then you're topping with those diced, drained, and seasoned tomatoes. And sometimes you'll sprinkle a little Parmesan right on top. You can do some dry oregano, some dry basil. It really kind of depends on how you're making it. But this is the gist of it, right? So I have my oven heated to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. With the stone in there, I'm preheating it for 45 minutes, and I'm going to turn it down to 400 as soon as I put it in. And what that does is that hot 500-degree stone helps to transfer the heat to the bottom of the crust first and get that crust to brown. And then you want to turn it back down so the rest of the pie has a chance to cook all the way through. And here I've baked this for about 35 minutes until the crust is a light golden brown all the way around, and obviously the pizza is hot all the way through. So here I'm using an offset miniature spatula to dismount this from my cast iron pan onto a cutting board. And this is because I just really don't want to cut use my chef's knife to portion this inside the pan. So there you have it, right? It's dismounted from the pan. Now you could cut in the pan, but it might dull your chef's knife and it might scratch up your cast iron. So that's a decision that you need to make. Now you will have some moisture here from the sauce when you go to slice this, and that's nothing to worry about because of the high fat content of your dough. It'll actually hold up to this moisture pretty good. So what I like to do is I like to just go through and slice it up, and then just move it onto a separate plate, and you get 8 slices. And those are 8 really thick slices that are going to fill people up. So there you have it, Chicago-style deep dish pizza. And for the crust recipe, supporting information, and for all our other pizza videos, Neapolitan, Sicilian, all that good stuff, head on over to stellaculinary.com/pizza.